Hello, everybody, and welcome to Sparing Partners. When I started it, I thought that I would soon run out of topics and guests, and I was just a little bit worried about that. And this is not a year, but almost. And I have to say, I had the opposite problem. There's just so many things coming up, and everything is kind of new and different. And today, the format and sort of like the frame of the podcast is slightly different. And my guest is Mansoor Hanif, and he's an independent executive advisor. And I've known Mansoor for a very long time, since he was a BT, then he moved to Ofcom and NEOM, and he's going to tell us about that. But I want to tell you first, how this podcast came to be. So Mansoor asked me about an interview that we recorded a long time ago in 2018, it turns out, for a report, which is not available on the Sensophilia website, but I will make a link and you can read it, even though it's relatively old. And so I read it and I thought, well, this is actually interesting, because this was a conversation we had about automation. And that was, way back when we talked a little bit about AI and ML, but they were really kind of not very hot topics at the time. And we talked about zero touch automation. And so it's really interesting, because we always look at the future, which obviously we should, but sometimes going back to the past is also very instructive. And these days everybody talks about, this is this is nothing new and whatever, but now we have a way to prove it, that this is actually nothing new, because we were actually thinking about it. And some of the issues are still there. Some we have made progress. So this is going to be an opportunity to look at what we said, or actually what Mansoor said way back then, and what's happening today. So it's, I'm very excited about this conversation. I'm really glad we're doing it. But so before we get into the weeds, Mansoor, why don't you tell us who you are and actually what your path is? So we did the interview when you were at BT and then you moved on. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about all of this.
Yeah, sure. And thanks for Monica for arranging this. And yeah, it's a very scary thing to reread what you said and was published publicly 8 years ago, and to look at it objectively in the light of day to see, did it still make sense? So this is what drove me to kind of contact you on this. So thanks for digging it out. And yes, so when we did the interview, it was February 2018. I was in London at the time. I was at BT, director of converged networks, with my team based out of Ad Astra. And I remember it was quite an interesting subject at the time, automation and a little bit of AI, but it was really about that zero touch. I was actually in the process of leaving BT, so just the following month, I departed. And within a few months, I was at Ofcom, so I went to the regulatory world. My background had been very technical, and I was a manager, I was a director, but I still had been quite hands-on until the most recent years. That's why it was a topic that I was very close to, because I'd done a lot of optimization with automation quite recently before the interview. So then I went to the regulator, and then I got this crazy call from a headhunter to go to this crazy project called NEOM, which, being the person I am, sounded amazing, and I really was excited about it. So I couldn't say no, even though I was enjoying Ofcom. So within 2 years from that interview, I was in the desert in Saudi Arabia, accelerating human progress. That was my mission as part of the NEOM project. Lots of things have been said and done, about NEOM, and everybody's aware of it now. It's not a subject for today. All I can say was I was very involved in technology and digital sector in various roles for 4 years. Worked really hard there, enjoyed it a lot, learned a lot. But in May of last year, decided it was time to move on for various reasons. And so I came back to Europe partially, and then I started working out of Dubai as an independent executive and network advisor, CTO type of interim roles. Also an investor. I've done some angel investments. Basically, trying to make sure that I use my time in the most effective way for myself and for the people, and working and doing things I love. And that's what I'm doing at the moment. So out of the blue, I wasn't expecting to travel so far from home, but out of the blue, I got a call from a friend of a friend that they needed somebody with my experience here in the Philippines. And that's where I am. I'm working here for Smart Philippines. I hadn't been here before, but an amazing country with amazing people who made me feel very welcome. So I've been here since December, working on the Smart Philippines network, and I'm really enjoying that. And it's great to get back into the nitty gritty of telecoms, because while I had still been involved in telecoms in Neo, it wasn't hands on. So this is what drove me to contact you, because um, it just struck me the things that had actually moved on and the things that hadn't. And I was curious to say, what did we actually say at the time, and did it actually come true? And that's what it's all about. But just I should clarify that I'm speaking as an individual today. It's not the views of Smart Philippines at all. So, and I can't go into any confidential details there, but I'm really interested in just sharing our thoughts of this bittersweet feeling you get when you look back at your words from the past. Some things that have gone great, some things that are really frustrating to see they haven't moved on at all.
Yes. And so I'm going to ask you what is the difference, but I'm going to quote you. I don't think I've ever quoted anybody, not, well, obviously not myself, but I'm going to quote you from the interview, and then you can tell me, what changed and what didn't. So you said networks are so complex with so many variables that can occur in them that at this stage, it's quite dangerous to run a zero-touch automated process on anything significant that can impact the customer experience, simply because there is always going to be something unexpected. And then you said when you're talking about automating important functions across a network, it's possible to do that at a low level, but at any point in a very complicated loop with many interactions, you're likely to meet something totally unexpected. And I think that this is really absolutely so true and underappreciated. But why don't you just tell me, when you read it, what is that you thought I got that right? Or, well, actually, what you got it right or wrong, or where did we make more or less progress?
Yeah, well, thank you for choosing that one, because that's one of the things I think I got right. Not everybody may agree, but luckily, I think that one it's spot on. I mean, networks are complex. Um, I think networks are some of the most complex mechanisms devised by man, or a woman, humankind. So it's really it's really that hasn't changed, and things are more complex today. And actually, it highlights that article that you published was all about automation making sense out of complexity, and how to manage more and more complexity. So the sense that there was that networks are complex, they're going to get even more complex. And so we will absolutely have to use more automation just to be able to get things done and satisfy our customers with this complexity. So I think it justified the headline of the article, the main point of the article. And have things changed? No, I don't think networks are any less complex. However, I would say there is a caveat. There is an area of networks that there should be more automation and are more, let's say, adapted to full automation, and that's private networks. And at the time, we didn't actually talk about it in the article, but I was pushing a lot the idea of private networks, and 4G initially, and then 5G coming up, and I thought it was a big opportunity. Now those are commercial. They're being offered by a number of players. There's some really good products out there. Those type of networks, which are small in scale and are for specific ranges of customers, they're very well adapted to full automation. So I think you could certainly do zero touch on that network, depending how big and complex it is or isn't. However, it is still slightly disappointing to see that 7 years? 7 years on, and they're still emerging. They're not really that as prevalent as I thought they would be at this stage, looking back now over 7 years.
Yeah, well, I guess that with private networks, there is an issue. It's not as much. It's not as much private networks, regardless of automation. So that seems to be a slightly different issue. But
Hmm.
clearly, you could also argue that if they were more automated and simpler to run, there would be more of them. Because if it isn't, if you do not automate, and it's really a lot of manual stuff, then it's much more expensive to run and more complex, more complex. Um, so that's absolutely the case. One thing that I came across, which kind of surprised, well, not surprised, well, actually it did surprise me, is when I read a report on energy efficiency. I always thought energy efficiency is a trivial thing. Like it's a very simple target: reduce consumption of power. I mean, like it's a boring topic. It was the most interesting one. I mean, I think it was the most interesting
Hmm.
report I ever written. I learned so much because you can just reduce power and be happy with it, because at some point you can say I have no power consumption and I turn the network down. So it's a trade-off. So when you do automation there, and you want it to be automated, obviously, you need to do it in think about trade-offs. So the whole you don't do power, you don't automate power consumption on its own, because you're going to be failing. You need to do it with in the context of what users are doing, what the network can do. So everything. So you have to automate at a higher level, which is why when you talk about the interactions, that's where the difficulty of automation comes in. So you can automate a small piece, but what is difficult is to automate the whole thing. And that's where the big advantage is. So how do you think we're doing there?
Well, I was going to pick up on that point as well, because it's one of the things that struck me is I don't think, and I did reread the whole article and most of the interviews, I don't think we mentioned energy savings at all in the automation. It's interesting, isn't it? Because now you look at,
Mhm.
there would never be anywhere in automation or AI where you speak about it today that wouldn't have something about energy savings, power savings, sustainability, etc. So that's already, it's a significant thing looking back at how important that's become over the last 7 years. At the time, we were doing stuff on energy, but it wasn't something that we were putting front and forward. It was more about being able to reach further in rural areas without having access to power, and that led us to more energy efficiency. But yeah, to your point, it's a very complex thing. So um, it's a very hot topic, and I know that a lot of operators might have 20 to 25, 30 different initiatives across the board, between the RAN, between the workflow management, between the fuel savings, between it's right across the board, everywhere in the network. There's something there, and that's so there's lots of small pieces. Now you try and automate that into a single, uh, um, let's say, automated platform, and it's quite dangerous because uh, they're all interlinked in many cases. So that's where you probably need, your fire doors, etc., to make sure that you don't knock over the whole system. I think we're all shocked at what happened yesterday in Spain and the whole of the network coming down. Now, while I was in NEOM, I did work on the regulations for the renewable power. And it was one of the things that we were always worried about because it's such a complex system. Managing a power grid it's difficult, and the more renewables you have, the less predictable it becomes, and then it becomes almost like a network. But they really need to manage the voltage in such a way that is even more tight in telecoms. In telecoms, we mess it up, and we will have drop calls and unhappy customers, et cetera, et cetera. There, it's a chain reaction. The whole thing goes down because the voltage variation. And just last week, Spain had, I think, the first weekday when it was fully running on renewable power. It was very impressive, but I was thinking, wow, they must be getting a bit worried about, the instability of the systems. So again, I'm just speculating because obviously we don't know if that was the cause or anything. I'm just making the point that effectively, when you're talking about larger systems that are interconnected and interdependent, then the risks increase. And that's why in the article, I was saying that we could automate even on networks or energy networks, 80% of the tasks with those fire doors to protect the rest. But to get to that 100%, it takes a lot for those final elements, which increase your instability of the system. Now, though, I think though on networks, we're getting closer to the 90% or so. And there's still some elements that require human in the loop. But it's gotten small. So there has been some progress. We haven't gotten from 80 to 99, but we've gotten from 80 to 90, perhaps.
90% automation, you think?
I'm talking about tasks, not about
Oh,
the
okay.
overall outcome, because a lot of the tasks, are repeated. So um, there's still a number of tasks. I'm thinking of the tasks that still require an absolutely human in the loop, and I think those high-level tasks, which supervise the overall network quality and performance, still require humans in the loop for sure.
No, absolutely, yeah. And well, I guess it also depends, like the TM forum has all the different layers, levels of automation, up to
Yeah.
5. And the thing is that, if you look at a single task, you might be layer 4, or, whatever. But the question is that, how is that the whole network? And then, so it's a little bit, could be, how can I say, not misleading, but, how do you measure it at the overall level? And so that's a little bit tricky right there, isn't it?
Mm.
Uh,
It is, but and that's actually another point I was going to point out of what's changed. And I think the structure and frameworks around automation have developed a huge amount. And I think the TM forum is first and foremost there. They have this very well structured methodology of assessing.
it's
And
very
I don't know
good, yeah.
how many partners have come to say, "Oh, we've done all these assessments and all that." And I go, "Very good." Everybody's there in the middle streak of the 2 or 3 or whatever, and there's a couple of outliers. But I get really bored quickly when people come to me with benchmarks and the kind of generics because they don't know what these tasks are. I mean, I still think that in most networks, just generalizing, probably 60 to 70% of the issues are power or transmission in most networks. Right? So when people come and say, "Oh, we've automated 70% of the tasks," I said, "Right, so you're just kind of you're dispatching the alarms better for transmission." And that's the underlying reality. There's a lot of you shouldn't let the structure obscure the actual reality of where the value is and what the outcomes are. So I think it's very valid and very useful as a tool, the TM Forum type of framework. But I still believe we haven't yet broken through that final piece to make it really useful. And so what I would tell people is let's look at specific pain points of things that are causing pain to our customers, and let's just work on those and then use that then to build on to really see what our real maturity level is and what our real outcome is. And I think one of the biggest pain points, one thing that really shocks me and that's really still holding back automation is inventory management. Inventory management is network inventory hasn't moved on as I would have thought. There was a lot of tools out there uh, 10, 15 years ago, and I thought that's a good bedrock to actually build on automation. And it hasn't gone. I mean, there are automatic discovery tools that are out there now, but it hasn't moved to the extent that I was expecting it to. Because it's kind of the boring back office stuff that you need to do. But you can't do automation without knowing what you've got out there, and then you put it together, right? So I was shocked at how little things have gone ahead. And actually, Monica, it made me think of human civilization because people think of human civilization as this straight line of development where you start off as cavemen and hunting and hitting people over the head with sticks, and then you become philosophers and artists, and here we are. And it's a straight line, but that's not the way it goes. It's the rise and fall of civilizations, and it's the same with networks. Most networks today, they have been crippled by mergers and acquisitions and uh, merging different systems, different IT systems, different networks, and sharing and this and that. And so now what you've got is these cannibalized systems that you've got multiple inventories that were very clean maybe 10, 15 years ago and now aren't. So this is what's been happening to networks, and that holds you back for the automation in the end because you don't have a clear view of what you've actually got in the network to automate. So I think this is the biggest blocker still today is that inventory. So smart, intelligent, dynamic inventories that can actually auto discover from data flows and pull it out that's what I'm really interested in nowadays, because that will get us ahead, and it can self configure, and I think that's where we should be aiming for now.
Yeah, and I think, this is kind of the not very sexy part of it. Just making sure that you have your foundations right. And that's
Yeah.
kind of like it's just more hard work than, you're not doing network slicing, but network slicing does require, inventory in order to work. But you just much rather focus on that because it sounds cool.
Absolutely.
And that I think it's
Exactly.
a generally, I mean, and actually I've been writing a lot about, how you need to get the foundations right in order to
Mm.
get automation, AI, whatever you're doing. Otherwise, you're not going anywhere. The technology is not going to solve any kind of a problem you have at the bottom. If the
No.
foundations are not right, there is no amount of technology
Yeah.
that can help you. In fact, it might make it worse because, you know. So now I'm going to put you again on this because at the end of our interview, you said in the long term, people probably think of it as a long graph of gradual transition with some tipping points, perhaps. The reality is going to be a jerky process with ups and downs. There will be mishaps and there will be difficulties, and there will be points where we're going to have to deal with issues. The reality is obviously a lot more complex than the graph, which is exactly what you're saying. So
Yeah.
you
I forgot I
got
said that actually. So yeah, I'm the
yes,
tick there.
it's like
That's it.
exactly the same.
Thanks for
Anyway,
picking out the ones where I got right.
yes, I don't actually think you got much wrong, but anyway, but there is one, and so at that point we're talking about AI and ML, and now clearly they have become much more pervasive and powerful and all that. However, it was last year, and I was actually talking to an ex-colleague of yours, I think at BT. I was at a user
Mm.
meeting for a client, and we were talking about AI and automation. And he's like, well, we talk about using AI for everything, but for a lot of things, we actually don't need it. What you called algorithms, that's really, I mean, sort of deterministic. If A, then B, or, so you don't need an AI model to figure it out because you already know how to automate. Um, do you think that we got kind of to a point where we just use AI for everything? Or we think we need to use AI for everything. And for a lot of things, you just, you know, your algorithms, if A
Mm.
then B, is just enough. So deterministic
Yeah.
kind of
It's
script.
a good point. Yeah, and I think AI, the term is being abused a lot, and in particular, AI and automation get bundled together and confused sometimes. And sometimes people think automation is AI and AI is automation, but they're both slightly different things. Um, but I think the technologies underpinning AI have developed a lot. In your report, you focused on two things that will, quoting you now, two things that are going to change the way we do automation and enable it further. One was processing power, and the other one was data. So processing power, absolutely. Yes, it has increased, but the demands required for these algorithms has increased to the extent that it's quite expensive now still to run that processing power, and it's all going to the cloud, and now you have GPUs as a service and everything else. So yes, processing power has improved. The algorithms have improved. Is that still cost effective and sustainable at this point? I think we can do more on that. Even going with the cloud, I think it requires a lot more. On the data is where though I wanted to point out though that AI obviously relies on data, and I still feel that we were so optimistic about big data. In the report, it was optimistic about big data. I was optimistic too, but to be honest, at that stage, I was already quite cynical on the data side because I'd seen the data, and I used to say we don't actually have big data. What we have is dirty data, and it's still the case today, unfortunately. If you don't have, and it's down to what you just said, discipline on the unsexy, dirty dishwashing work you need to do in the background, which is the basis for everything. Nobody wants to do it. Nobody wants to wash the dishes. Nobody wants to kind of do peel the potatoes in the dark room before the meal. Everybody wants to be there, pouring the champagne or whatever. So, so data discipline about organizing your data is still poor. And even in things like trouble tickets at the time in EE, I used to get so mad about all these tickets we had, and we couldn't even have the discipline to make sure that the engineers, this was the kind of third-party outsourced engineers, they had a common way of describing a site or a common way of describing an outage. So we couldn't run any stats and we couldn't run any data. So things now, I think if we were to do one thing for 6G, one thing that would make a difference, standardize data, standardize ticketing, standardize the way you report outages. You do that, and you're going to have a huge burst of automation coming out, because today you don't. So that is moving now thanks to TM4 and things like that, but we could do more there. So AI is obviously very reliant on the data. At the time, we did speak about AI and machine learning, and I mentioned that in BT, my colleagues were using it to program field visits, etc. Again, unsexy work, but it's things that make a difference. What we didn't predict was Gen AI, generative AI, and I think that was a bit of a surprise. And it came a little bit left field, but that's what the part that is perhaps new there. And Gen AI is now being picked up on as something that can really improve the way we interface with our tools. But the way it's being used in telecoms at the moment, so far, it's very much more a different interaction with your tools. So you can chat to your OMC, you can chat to your workstation, and it'll tell you where the site is and what's happening and all that, rather than solving the problem, right? So today, Gen AI is being used mainly for that. It's more of kind of a smarter interface, which is for me very disappointing, because you would expect to have the future of these the agentified systems, which actually are smart and intelligent and can resolve the 90% of the problems. They are not yet ready. I haven't seen any of them. I've been looking. They will come, I hope. But that's where AI has developed in the Gen AI side. So it's kind of giving us a new interface, but it still hasn't developed much more than that. And we still have an issue with the data. So the inventory and data in a more generic sense in terms of the way we classify tickets is holding us back. But the one thing we didn't actually highlight at the time as well is API, which is massive. So that is that's actually the thing that's excited me the most since I came back into hands-on telecoms, is the potential for what APIs can do. Now, at the time, we were pushing it through things like MEC, where we thought, well, if you got your base station on the edge, you probably got a lot more local information that could be useful to the local customer, and therefore we could allow access to that to the local customer and give value. That's where the thinking started getting going, and now it's become a whole ecosystem that's really happening now. And I think just the fact of having common APIs across networks horizontally will open up fantastic new opportunities for automation that we haven't even really started to tap into yet. So that's a really exciting space, and I know you've done a lot of podcasts around the API ecosystem. But at the time, yeah, it wasn't. I don't think we mentioned anything about the APIs, but that's another key enabler that's actually there now.
Yeah, I guess at the time, I mean, people were sort of using it, but not like across networks. So it was kind of more of an internal thing, if used at
Mm,
all. And I think that the APIs go along with the issue of standardizing the data. I mean,
mm,
and especially because if you have multiple vendors in your network, then you need to be able to use the data from different vendor sources. And
mm,
if everybody has they they make their data available in completely different ways, then that kind of breaks down any automation, or it creates a much more much more trouble. So
mm,
so I think you raise excellent points in terms of getting to do the basic work, moving forward, and making sure. Now, there is another thing that you pointed out that actually it was the first time we actually had it in an interview, the issue about cultural issues. And I think that this is like a really still, there's more people talking about it, but I think it's still underappreciated. And it's not just with automation, it's like technology is a great help, but how you use it in terms of from a cultural point of view, that's what makes it successful or not. It doesn't matter how good the technology is, if you don't integrate it well in your workforce, forget it. It's not going to help you. And what is that how do you see that as change? Has that changed, or are we
Mm.
making any progress there? Or what are the
That's a big topic.
challenges?
Yeah. So yeah, I did reread that part of it, and I would say so. There's telecoms and there's the wider world, right? In telecoms, I think the impact hasn't been as wide as I see elsewhere. Um, what I mentioned in the report was that we need to start thinking about reskilling our teams into two fields. One is people who will be overseeing the algorithms and becoming more experts on the technical side to oversee and guide the algorithms or the agents now, as we're talking about, um, the humans in the loop, effectively. And the other side would be freeing up more people to actually spend more time with our customers, because customers, it's everything to us, and the customers, they'll get a lot of utility out of bots, but they still value human contact. So that was my thinking at the time. It's an interesting to see how that's evolved, because I remember, but I did understand the challenge, and I did use the word social contract there because it was very much our thinking in Europe, at least, and in British Telecom in particular, with a workforce at the time of 130,000. Um, so we felt a responsibility to those people who'd spend their lives, building the networks, etc. It was interesting, and I think it was 2 years ago, when the CEO of BT, Philip Janssen, made a statement saying that they were going to reduce the workforce down to 55,000 thanks to AI and automation. And I think when I read that, I was thinking, "Whoa, what's going on here?" So I think on the one hand, he was saying uh, we will be helped by AI, and we will train our people to use automation and AI. Um, and there's going to be a natural kind of slowing down of our needs for people in the field, because also we'll have finished both fiber and all that. So I don't think what he was saying was as drastic as it sounded, but you know how the British press is, and they just had a field day and said they're going to, lay off thousands, tens of thousands of people to AI, etc. So there was a big, so they basically they hounded him on that one. So, but it's obviously a huge topic. So that's in telecoms. I haven't seen so much of it being effective enough for us to really optimize the workforce. But I think I don't think it's the right way of looking at using automation in networks is to employ less people. But I think pretty much most operators are pretty stretched as it is. I think it's about doing more with less. I think there's lots of revenues and lots of services that are not being created today, or being rolled out today, or being segmented in the way they could to new customer segments, because we simply don't have the people to do it, and it's too much time and effort to do. So I think it's actually it's still a big subject for telecoms in terms of automation, but I don't believe in automation as a way to employ less people. I see automation as a way to increase revenues through avoiding outages, giving better quality of service, and therefore having more airtime and more revenues, and also offering new services and actually enabling the mythical 5G slicing, which now is starting to become available, but really requires automation to make it commercially viable, which we always said is happening now, which is exciting. So, however, if you look at the broader world, that's where I'm quite pessimistic, because it was always a battle of um, what are the outcomes you're looking for from any technology. Technology should be outcomes focused rather than technology focused. That's one thing I've been pushing for 6G, that we should be looking at the outcomes. And effectively, I'm worried about the way technology is being used in around the world outside of telecoms, where effectively it's just down about there's no mention anymore of social contract. There's no mention anymore about the outcomes you're looking for, except for raising GDP by doing more with less people and being more productive, and that's it. That's the end of story. And that's really not what we're really about. So that does worry me, and I even worry for my kids. My kids now are coming out into the workforce and just getting their first job, especially people coming out of university getting their first jobs. Is getting more and more difficult now, because those are the areas that most of the big consultancies and legal firms and everything else are looking to automate. Then you have the artists as well who are at risk of being automated. Um, so I'm in the process of writing my own first novel, and I've made a point of never sharing it to any AI automation because I know that suddenly my voice will be in among the stream of AI voices out there, and I just want to keep my own voice. So yeah, there's a lot of issues around that, but in telecoms, I think it's been less than expected so far. My personal view, I mean, just generalizing, but around the world, it's worrying now. Now, what it means is we really have to take it seriously about the outcomes we're looking for with technology and make sure we fight for it to be equitable for everybody. And I know that sounds like, kind of do-goody generic, but I feel it now for my kids. I actually feel the pain that they may have to go through if we don't get it right and give everybody a fair shot.
No, absolutely, and I think this is really an issue. It's in telecoms, like some of the ethical aspects might be not as urgent, but they're there
Yeah.
too. Because the nature of our work is going to change. So, okay, you're not going to fire people, but their nature of their work might change. And I think in a very positive way. Maybe we have to work fewer hours, which is good. We might have a job, if you're doing customer service where you actually try to solve problems rather than do kind of like the sort of more boring stuff that the bot can do. So I
Mm.
think that is actually a huge opportunity. This is like what happened with the Industrial Revolution, that in the short term it was bad. And we might actually have something that in the short term there is a local worsening of the situation as we get people trained, reskilled. Being reskilled might not be a happy experience for everybody. It requires work and effort for everybody in society. So we need to think about it and discuss it, not as a technology issue, as a social contract type of issue. It's not just how many people you have hired. This is what they do. How do you transition?
Yeah.
How do you move to something else? But with the Industrial Revolution, so it was pretty bad at the beginning, on and off. But what ended up happening is that people were able to buy a lot of more, say, textiles than they could otherwise because the price went down, and the job conditions were better. So at the end, it was better for everybody, but it
I'm not
was
sure, Monica. I think
well, what I'm saying
there's
is like, but it was in the short term, it was bad. So
I think
so
it's a really good example. I think it's a really good example. My own thinking is evolving all the time. I'm a human being, so I change my mind, and so I would have agreed with you maybe 10 years ago. I think that if you look at the Industrial Revolution and textile in particular, there was winners and losers,
yeah,
and some of the losers never came back to winning, never. And so, and you're talking about millions of people now, billions of people who are impacted by this. So, and these were, there was a good quality of life. There was people who were making good living from quality products. But the key thing there, what happened there, and I'm not saying anything is inherently good or bad. It's about who controls what, and it's
yeah,
about centralization versus decentralization. Now, if you come up with a machine that does the work of 100 million people, well, fine. So, what do you expect 100 million people to do? And is it worth just having a cheaper T-shirt? So so I think there's a balance there. Of course, we want to be productive, we want to be efficient, but we need to make sure that we're clear about the implications of what we're doing, and we risk. This is what we absolutely risk doing now, wrong, with automation and AI. More in the kind of the broader aspect, which is not perhaps the main focus of today. But if we get it wrong, it's again over centralization with a few people rather than actually spreading the benefits of technology to a wider source. It's decentralization versus centralization is the main theme of the modern world today, and we have a lot of challenges there. And we need to come to some kind of compromise that works, I think. And the example of textile is actually one where I think we got it wrong over the if you look at the whole world rather than just the industrialized countries.
yeah. No,
Personally,
absolutely. And no, and well, this is exactly. I completely agree with you. There's going to be winners and losers. Well, during the Industrial Revolution, there were winners and losers. I think that we should brace for that right now too, and minimize that. Or okay, if it's okay, some segments are going to be losers. How do we help them get out of that, because at the same time, if you say let's not do this, let's not use AI, let's not use automation, that's not a solution either.
No,
So
no, no, no.
we need to make sure we learn from the past. And as I said, the industrial revolutions was good and bad, and I think it's going to have some bad elements to it. So the
Yeah,
question is that how we manage it.
yeah.
And as I said, I'm particularly worried about the younger generation, because oftentimes people say, well, but young people know how to deal with this. Well, yes, but the change is a change. So for us that are kind of like more at the senior level, I think that we're going to be less impacted. Maybe
Yeah,
I'm
it's more
wrong.
about it's about equity and justice, and
Yes.
so I think the big lever everybody has is data. So uh, personal data and
Yeah.
data that's owned by companies. We just need to make sure that the data governance is equitable and you get a fair share of what's being done with your data, which is obviously a big theme in the legal world around AI and the algorithms, and especially for artists, etc. And I'm really encouraged some of these startups I've been investing in and talking to are focused on making sure the artists get a fair return while they really pushing AI agentized versions of themselves into platforms that make them available to other people, which is great. I think that's fine. That's the perfect thing. There is I'm an optimist, so I do believe there's a fair balance out there to push ahead with the technologies, but in a way where we actually make it fair for everybody, and it's a win-win for everybody. Um, there's still the risk that we don't do that and we get it wrong, which is what worries me when you don't get fair return for the data that's used.
No, absolutely. And that I think is the issue, is to get a fair return. And what worries me personally is the fact that a lot of this discussion is kind of like expecting the tech companies to do the right thing, which they might or might not, but it's a society issue. We cannot delegate it to the Meta, the Googles, or whatever. It has to be, it's a society issue. It's not a technology issue. I mean, okay, it is obviously rooted in technology, but the question is society has to decide how to use technology. It shouldn't be the tech companies.
Yeah, and that's why I think,
That's
well,
where we need to kind of take it
yeah,
in our hands. I mean, as a society, uh, you know.
and that's why I think, we should be looking at outcome-based specifications for future technologies, saying, making it really clear what we're trying to achieve with this. And again, I'm not somebody who's against technology, but I think we just need to make sure that it's focusing on the outcomes we're trying to achieve. I've completely changed my thinking on this over the last 10, 15 years after what's happened, and maybe I'll change again. But this is the
So
way
what
I
was
see it
this?
now,
What
is
was
that,
the major change that you were more optimistic and now less optimistic, or the other way around?
well, I couldn't see anything bad whatsoever in the way technology was rolled out. 10 years ago, I was actually I was at an event with Tim Berners-Lee, and he was kind of starting, his agitation in terms of the future of the internet. And I was lucky enough to be in an event with him, and I was delighted to speak to him. And I thought, wow, he's an amazing guy, but what's he on about? Well, what are the dangers? And what's wrong with the internet? And everything's fine. And over time now, I see the issues, and I see, what really on my own personal viewpoint of having worked with a lot of smart people and entrepreneurs and startups and all that, it really disappointed me that the only goal for these people was to be acquired in 3 years by Cisco or Google or whoever. And I'm not against any of these companies. I'm just saying that's not what that's not how we plan the internet, for to have four or five big players, and then anybody's got any ideas can aspire to be bought up and sell off and then go to the beach or do something else. That's not what we aspired for. We aspired for people with great ideas who would feel, yeah, let's go ahead and develop it, and then help other people, and etc. So I think that the whole thing about a creator economy and allowing platforms that allow people to innovate and create is something that, especially when over the last 5 years I've been trying to create. And that's where I'm investing now as well, at a very small. I'm not a one of those big investors. I'm a very small angel investor. But whenever I see something that can fit into that future system that would allow a creator economy, more equitable um, innovations, and allow other people to create, that excites me, and that's what I'm trying to help with. Whether it makes any money or not, we'll wait and see. But at least it opens up, the whole Web3 base for us to have hope that we can change things.
Absolutely. On this optimistic note, we have to close, but I think this is really important to have, we love the technology, but we want the technology. And because we love the technology, we want it to do good, because there is a huge opportunity to do good. We don't want to waste it, but it's not trivial. So
Yeah, just to close, maybe I can just recapping on the actual report overall. I mean, yes, there was certain things that didn't happen. Overall, I think the headline was spot on about the complexity, and the drivers were clear. NFV and SDN is a huge driver now, and NFV is now becoming more mature in networks, starting to. It's taken a lot longer than anybody expected. 5G slicing, obviously, it can only really be commercialized, and then we had the whole kind of the back of the house baseline cleaning of operations, which is still a big theme. We haven't fixed that yet, especially field operations. But just looking to the future, I'm excited about where automation is going to take us now. And I'll just very quickly just sum up that in terms of now is the time for 5G consumer. Devices are lower. We got better segmentation. We've got even kind of mini MVNOs being formed by operators where you can offer tailored experiences with tailored customer experience for certain segments of customers, perfect for automation. So I think that's going to be a big boom in terms of how to automate creating specific segments of people, even with or without network slicing. That's a huge piece, and that's where you would have a customer experience index for which are different from various groups. That's exciting. The direct satellite to phone is exciting. It's such a complex system. It's coming up from next year onwards. How do you manage the cells from space with your cells from the terrestrial? How do you make that real time? How do you know when to switch one to the other? How do you manage the customer experience, capacity, exciting space? And then you got the whole of the API enabled automations that are just about starting now. That's a whole space to explore. So there are lots of things to look forward to in automation and networks, and that's why it's an exciting space to be back into.
absolutely. Well, thank you so much. And maybe in maybe not 5 or 7, 7 years ago, 6 years ago, maybe we should see whether your new comments are what's going to happen. Are we going to get there? Well, so Mansoor, thank you so much for your thoughts with us today.
Thanks, Monica. All the best.
And thank you all for listening in, and keep listening to us and subscribe to the Sparring Partners feeds on your favorite platform. Thank you so much.